Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are going to completely dismantle a pretty massive culinary myth. When most people hear the phrase French cuisine, they immediately picture this single unified menu. You think of baguettes, rich sauces, high-end techniques, right? Well, here's the truth. That singular cuisine doesn't actually exist. We're going to embark on a geographical journey across France to see exactly how dramatically different local climates, shifting historical borders, and honestly, even ancient tax laws shaped entirely distinct local food worlds.
Okay, here's our roadmap for the trip. First up, butter, apples, and sea. Second, hardy borders and alpine peaks. Third, royalty and gastronomic capitals. Fourth, sun, sea, and olive oil. And finally, number 5, earthy flavors and ancient roots. Let's dive in.
All right, Section 1, butter, apples, and sea, covering Normandy and Brittany.
It's crazy to think about, but centuries of history literally define the ingredients up here in the Northwest. It actually starts way back in the 9th and 10th centuries. Northmen brought Norman dairy cows to the region, and their exceptionally rich, high-fat milk became the absolute foundation of the local diet. Moving into the 13th century, we see the creation of buckwheat galettes, which are basically early savory crepes, in Brittany. We also get these incredibly bold, complex cheeses like Liverat, famous for its sticky orange rind and pungent, almost meaty flavor. Fast forward a bit to the late 1700s, and a farmer named Marie Harel supposedly creates the globally famous Camembert. And let me tell you, the traditional version here is so much more complex than the mass-produced stuff you find in the supermarket. Now, isn't it wild how a simple tax policy can fundamentally shape an entire region's flavor profile? Historically, almost all of France was burdened by a heavy salt tax, but Brittany managed to score a unique exemption. This meant Breton farmers could heavily salt their butter without going broke. They literally built an entire category of pastries around this salted, crunchy butter. This famously birthed the incredible caramelly Queen butter cake. Being a maritime region, this area also gives us distinctly oceanic flavors, everything from metallic-tasting Balon oysters to the simple, clear Cotriod fish stew that local fishermen would whip up with whatever they hadn't sold. Moving right along to Section 2, hardy borders and alpine peaks, looking at Alsace, Lorraine, and the Alps. So this eastern region has a really fascinating contrast built into it. Up in Alsace, right along the Rhine River, centuries of conflicts brought in heavy Germanic techniques. To survive the freezing winters, locals relied on fermenting vegetables just to get their winter vitamins. That gave us Choucroute, a deeply flavorful fermented sauerkraut cooked with juniper berries and loaded with pork. But if you head south to the Alps and the Savoie region, survival looked totally different. Up there, it depended on deeply complex, ultra-calorie-dense mountain cheeses like Beaufort. You pair that with potatoes, add some heavy Italian and Swiss influence, and boom, you get the legendary cozy fondue Savoyard. Smack in the middle of these two extremes is Lorraine. It's a gorgeous region of gentle farms and orchards that produces an astonishing 70% of the world's supply of Maribel plums. I mean, that's a huge monopoly. But Lorraine is also home to two massive culinary icons. First, the original quiche Lorraine. Fun fact, traditionally it contained absolutely zero cheese, none, just smoked pork belly, eggs, and cream. And second, the famous Madeleine sponge cakes. They're known for that characteristic little hump on the back, which is actually created by the thermal shock of freezing cold batter hitting a piping hot baking tin. But hey, it wasn't all heavy survival food up in the mountains. Back in the 14th century, to honor the visiting Holy Roman Emperor, the Count of Savoy made a very specific request. He wanted a dish as light as the alpine air. Local bakers totally stepped up to the plate. They beat eggs extensively with almost no fat to incorporate massive amounts of air into the batter, creating the remarkably spongy, delicate Gâteau de Savoie. It really proved the region could master delicate elegance just as well as winter comfort food. All right, on to Section 3, royalty and gastronomic capitals, focusing on the Loire Valley and Lyon. The Loire Valley is essentially the Garden of France, just packed with these stunning 15th and 16th century royal chateaux. And cooking for royalty demanded a certain level of refinement. So we got delicate freshwater fish paired with a light, tangy beurre blanc sauce and beautiful ash-coated goat cheeses like Celle-sur-Cher. But sometimes absolute brilliance is a complete accident. The famous tarte tatin was born at a local hotel when apples were accidentally overcooked in butter and sugar. To fix the mistake, they just quickly threw some pastry over the burning apples, baked it, and flipped it over to reveal a flawless, caramelized, upside-down tart, a total game changer. Heading just a bit south of the Loire, we hit Lyon, which is widely considered the gastronomic capital of the world. Here, robust, zero-waste cooking techniques really shine in local spots known as bouchons. Now, a bouchon isn't just your average restaurant. It's a small, slightly chaotic, super traditional eatery with those classic red checkered tablecloths. It's originally rooted in feeding hungry silk workers after their long, grueling shifts. So they serve incredibly hearty stuff like tablia de sapeur, which is a beef tripe dish brilliantly named after the leather aprons worn by military engineers, sitting right alongside incredibly refined, airy pike dumplings known as quenelles.
Okay, we are crossing a major geographical divide right now. As we sweep down toward the Mediterranean, we entirely trade the rich, heavy, creamy dairy belt of the north, which, as we saw, relies on butter, apples, and cider, for the hot, dry, stony landscapes of the south. We are entering a world built entirely on olive oil, garlic, tomatoes, and chilled rosé.
Which brings us to Section 4, Sun, Sea, and Olive Oil. Welcome to Provence and Languedoc.
Just look at the multi-part ritual of bouillabaisse from Marseille. It's amazing because it evolved from a humble, simple fisherman's leftover stew into this highly complex centerpiece. First, you get a heavily spiced broth, infused with saffron, fennel, and orange zest, served with a garlicky chili sauce called rouillé. Then, at least 4 kinds of Mediterranean fish are brought out whole and filleted right there at the table. It completely mirrors the philosophy behind Nice's ratatouille, taking peasant surplus summer vegetables like eggplant and zucchini and just slowly cooking them down until they collapse into a soft, deeply flavored masterpiece.
Provence is also super anchored in these deep, ancient traditions. For example, on Christmas Eve, they traditionally serve exactly 13 distinct desserts. They represent Jesus and the 12 apostles, featuring specific items like nuts, dried fruits, and sweetbreads. And all of this sits right alongside their everyday, intensely flavored staples, like tapenade. It's this brilliant, salty, pungent paste made from black olives, capers, and anchovies that just perfectly cuts through the heat of the climate. Scooting slightly west along the coast to Languedoc, which, fun fact, was actually the very first Roman colony in Gaul, we find a culinary DNA that is a really complex blend. You've got Mediterranean flavors, Catalan influences trickling over the Spanish border, Basque touches, and hearty inland mountain cooking all mixing together. This vibrant cultural collision gave the world the legendary slow-cooked bean and meat stew cassoulet, the whipped salt cod brandade from Nimes, and the intensely pungent Roquefort cheese. Amazingly, Roquefort received the first official food designation in history from King Charles VI way back in 1411. And finally, we arrive at Section 5, Earthy Flavors and Ancient Roots, exploring the Southwest and the Basque Country. Down in areas like Gascony and Périgord, fat isn't just an ingredient. It is literally the ultimate carrier of taste. And that brings us to confit. Confit is this very old preservation method where meat, specifically duck or goose, is cooked incredibly slowly in its own fat, then stored under a protective layer of that exact same fat in jars so it can last for months. When you finally cook it, the inside stays extremely soft and tender, while the outside skin crisps up perfectly. It is a deeply earthy cuisine, beautifully paired with the chocolatey, musky scent of what they call black diamonds, black truffles that are actively hunted by trained dogs and pigs in the local oak forests. Our final stop is the Basque Country. This is home to Europe's oldest indigenous people who speak Euskara, an ancient language with absolutely no known relatives. But despite being somewhat geographically isolated, they were brilliant global adapters. In the 1500s, Basque sailors brought chili peppers back from the Americas, giving us the famous Piment d'Espelette, which is actually the only official AOC-protected spice label in France. Then, in the 16th and 17th centuries, Jewish merchants fleeing the Iberian Peninsula introduced chocolate making to the city of Bayonne. By the 1800s, deep-sea Basque fishermen had firmly embedded Atlantic salt cod into the local diet. And all of these global influences sit beautifully alongside their own defining buttery masterpiece, the Gâteau Basque. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a provocative thought. If shifting borders, ancient taxes, and highly specific local climates created these entirely distinct, independent food worlds, is a unified French cuisine just an illusion? Is it really just a convenient label binding together dozens of fiercely independent culinary nations? Knowing how a windy coast or an alpine peak dictates exactly what ends up on the plate, it makes you wonder, what other national cuisines are actually just geographical myths waiting to be explored? Thank you so much for joining me on this culinary cartography tour. Keep questioning what you know, and I'll see you in the next explainer.